you actually want to kind of test yourself against your budget on a monthly basis, right? So you're looking on a monthly basis, where do we need to shift? How do we need to pivot if we're off track? And then if you're, exceeding, if you're doing well against your budget, how can we use this extra cash to really benefit our company and get closer to achieving our goals?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of It Depends, a podcast series brought to you by Hantzmon Wiebel. You know that if you've ever talked to an accountant, they've told you, well, it depends. This podcast series is for business owners, leaders, operators, accountants, or someone just wanting to learn more about the accounting industry. I'm your host, Clarissa Hoffman. Welcome back, Chapman. Today we're joined by Chapman Yoder, an FP&A analyst here at Hantzmon Wiebel.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me back.
Today we're going to talk about budgets. There's probably a lot of misconceptions about budgets, or people have one set definition in their mind about what a budget is.
Yeah, so, a lot of people think of a budget as just restricting expenses, right? So what they can't do, what they're not allowed to spend their money on. But in reality, a budget is more about setting expectations for both your revenue and your expenses, right? So if you listen to I know you listened to the last FP&A podcast that we did, but for the listeners, we talked about a 5-year plan, right? A long-range plan of where you want your organization to go, where you want your organization to be in the coming 3 to 5 years. We think of a budget as a stepping stone, or like a baby step towards achieving that 3 to 5 year plan within the next 12 months, right? So it's called an annual operating plan. A budget is kind of another interchangeable term for that. But it's about looking at what you're specifically going to do in the next 12 months in order to get closer to that 3 to 5 year plan. So it's about setting expectations, both revenue and expense-wise, in order to get closer to that goal. And then it's going to be the tool that you use throughout the year, hopefully on a monthly basis, to measure your performance against, see how your business is doing on the revenue generation, and then also on the spending. To just be able to track yourself, view opportunities as they come, and red flags as they show up, actively and proactively.
What are some of the common misconceptions about budgets?
Yeah, so I kind of already gave away the big one, which is about it's just about spending costs, right? I see that a lot in profitable companies. They'll kind of have the idea of, well, we're making money, so why the heck would we have to set a budget, right? We're gaining cash every month. So that is a very big misconception, but really it's about, setting goals. So say the profitable company wants to open a second location, in a couple years. Well, you got to ask the question, how much is that going to cost? Are you going to raise that capital on your own, just through, net income, saving cash, and then asking like, how long is that going to take? If you are getting that funding externally, you got to kind of ask yourself, can we support, debt, those interest payments? So the budget is going to help you answer those questions regarding your goals. So even if you don't necessarily need to cut costs, a budget is going to help you stay in place and be a tool to help you answer the questions regarding your goals. A second misconception is that a budget is just kind of a one-time event, right? One and done thing. You do it at the beginning of the year, you set it. You might have, your CFO or whoever's overseeing the finances dip in every few months, every quarter, just a single person looking at it, spot checking it. And then you get to the end of the year and you compare yourself to the budget. You either did really well or really bad. So that is a very big misconception. You actually want to kind of test yourself against your budget on a monthly basis, right? So you're looking on a monthly basis, where do we need to shift? How do we need to pivot if we're off track? And then if you're, exceeding, if you're doing well against your budget, how can we use this extra cash to really benefit our company and get closer to achieving our goals? The third misconception is that budgets are just for large organizations, right? Where you have thousands of employees, and so you set a budget in place to kind of keep everyone on the same track. But that, I think, is just a very bad mindset to have. I think whether you have 1 employee or 1,000 employees, the budget is more than just trying to get everyone coordinated. It's about setting individual goals for your organization and tracking it, tracking your progress, right? So it's not just for large organizations, but it can be a very useful tool for companies of all shapes and sizes.
What are some of the common types of budgets?
So there's four kind of main types of budgets. There's kind of a fifth hybrid that I'll explain, but the first type is by far the most common. It's the easiest to implement. It's called an incremental budget. So what you do with an incremental budget is you take the previous year's either actuals or a budget if you had one in place, and you just kind of adjust, a percentage or dollar base up or down for the next period. So it's going to be real easy to do, but the temptation with that is just to apply an increase or decrease across the board, right? Because it's just easy to do. But really, you want to be more analytical and more thoughtful with what you're increasing and what you're decreasing. So with our team, we have what's called a driver-based model for your forecasting that we use. So it's going to be real easy to tell what expenses are variable versus what expenses are fixed, right? So what makes sense to adjust up or down, what makes sense to, keep relatively the same. So that is the first type, is an incremental budget. The second type of budget is a rolling budget. So with your incremental budget, you set it for a 12-month period, right? You're going to go January to December. And then when you get to the end of December, you restart. So with a rolling budget, it's going to update every month or quarter to always have like a 12-month future forward-looking window, right? So it's going to update every month. It's just going to keep the plan adaptive and update with, market changes. So it's going to be for those companies that really need to be on their feet with a, fast-paced market, perhaps, or want to be really adaptable. That's going to be the rolling budget for them.
It sounds like a rolling budget would be beneficial for organizations that have comparable sales or revenue month over month, or is that not accurate?
Yeah, it could be accurate. It's definitely going to be easier to implement, if you have consistent data and results, right? Because you're not having to maybe make big changes, or you kind of know what's coming. So it's going to be easier to, expect what to happen in the next 12 months. It's going to take a lot more thought process on a month-to-month basis or a quarter-to-quarter basis than, say, an incremental budget. But it's going to give companies that flexibility to adapt and adjust based on where the market is, right? So say, the cost of your products all of a sudden spike just due to external factors. That rolling budget, you're going to be able to adapt and adjust to that in a timely manner, rather than, waiting the next quarter when you look at it again, or the next year even.
What are some other types of budgets?
So the third type of budget is called a zero-based budget. So this is where across the board, everything starts with zero, right? So this could be for startup companies that have zero historical data, or it could be for companies that just have bad historical data, right? Their accounting in their previous spot just wasn't very good, right? It's kind of all over the place. And it's going to be real intentional about justifying every single expense, right? So you start with zero, and then you justify every dollar expense that happens. So it's going to be a little maybe less common because it's going to take a lot of extra work and input from everyone involved, right? You don't want someone on the top level trying to justify expenses for a department that they just aren't really familiar with, right? You're going to want someone who's involved in the day-to-day to have their input. So it's just going to be a lot more collaboration, but that is a zero-based budget.
So we generally see these in nonprofits. A lot of nonprofits
Right.
use a zero-based budget, right? Because any stretch fundraising goals have a specific purpose tied to those goals.
Absolutely, yes. The fourth type of budget is called a top-down budget. So this is a little less common in small businesses. It's going to be more for larger organizations. And a top-down budget is where the top executives set the budget based on, kind of their vision for the organization, their goals, and then they're going to kind of force everyone to work within those constraints, right? Try to get their job done within the budget that the top executives set. You can kind of see the friction that this may cause. So what a lot of companies do is they'll combine a zero-based budget and a top-down budget, right? So you have the middle, upper management creating a zero-based budget, saying what they need in order to get their job done. And then you have the top executives doing a top-down, based on the goals and the vision of the organization They meet in the middle. Obviously, the top executives are probably going to have more say, but they meet in the middle in order to get kind of both sides of the story and kind of create that hybrid budget approach.
Can you share some budgeting best practices with us?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I would say that it is best practice to actually set goals and have a vision for your organization, right? So whether it is grow your top line revenue or become more efficient, with your net income or your margins, right? It's to set goals so that you can base your budget off of the goals. You want a direction. You don't want to just roll forward your budget just because it's a thing that you do every month, right? You want to actually set goals to improve your business. And along with that, you want to have a couple different scenarios, right? So you have your base budget, which is going to be, the scenario that you think is most likely to happen, the most obtainable, right? Realistic. And then you want to have what we call a stretch budget. So say in your base budget, you plan for 5% revenue growth, right? You want to create a stretch budget, say, where the revenue actually grows 15%. So that way, if the most optimistic thing were to happen, you're prepared for what to do with the extra cash, right? You're not just in that situation and wondering like, oh, what are we going to do now? Like, it's a good position to be in, right? But it's better to have a plan for what you're going to do if you're in that position. And then on the other hand, have a more pessimistic budget, right? So if revenue isn't growing or revenue actually shrinks, or your margins, just go haywire because of external factors, have more of a pessimistic budget so that you're prepared if that, if you were to be in that position. Secondly, and I would say this is probably one of my favorites, is to actually analyze your budget on a monthly basis and compare yourself to the results. I kind of talked about how your budget should not just be a one-time event, a one and done thing where you set it at the beginning of the year and hope that you come out on top at the end of the year. You should really be testing yourself against those expectations and against the goals that you set at the beginning of the year on a monthly basis, right? So this is going to keep you flexible. It's going to keep you on your feet, adaptable to what the changes are coming. You're going to be able to recognize opportunities and red flags straight away, right? So that you can make the changes necessary so that, again, you can get closer to achieving that long-term goals that you have for your company. So definitely, whether it's with our team or within your own team, analyze yourself against the budget on a monthly basis. Thirdly, you want to make sure to actually communicate your budget with all those involved, right? You have your top team that's going to kind of work on setting the budget, and then you can, briefly say what the budget entails to all those, day-to-day operational stakeholders, but you want to make sure to clearly communicate the goals and the expectations for everyone so that they know what to measure themselves up against. They know what they're supposed to be doing, what bounds they're supposed to be working within. Just make sure to communicate the goals clearly and the budget clearly across the board. Lastly, I would say you want to plan for the period coming, not the period that you are already in, right? So you don't want to be halfway through 2025 and then, decide to set a budget for that year. Obviously, if you're creating your first budget, you're going to start where you are, right? But if it's a reoccurring thing, you want to plan ahead. So with our team, we always have a forecast running for our clients, right? So if say we're in October of 2025, we're going to have a forecast for November and December of 2025 to get a good idea of where they're going to end up at the end of the year. So then you can use those 2025 numbers as the base for your 2026 budget, right? So you can plan ahead. So really, if you're planning for next year, you want to start to have that conversation and finalize in Q4 of the current year so that you're prepared, you're not behind, you don't kind of fall into a situation that you were not expecting, right, or that you're unprepared for. So you want to really make sure to plan ahead.
So much of accounting is historical, right? Mm-hmm. Looking back, but budgeting for sure is a combination of both, using your historical data and your current realities to set goals for the future.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you so much for your time today, Chapman. This is very useful information.
Yes, thank you for having me again. I'm curious what the next podcast topic is going to be.
Well, it depends.